come about it, and we'll get as far as we can in the 45 minutes we have today. Those of you who would like to be sharing on social, hashtag is hashtag WEF23, so please participate that way, and we'll also, of course, have audience questions. And so let me please introduce our panelists, and we'll save a seat here. Oh, here we are. Thank you. This is, correct me if I'm wrong, Maria Susana Muhammad, the Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia.
Right.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
For being with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, then we have Gilberto Tomazoni, Global CEO of JBS, the global food giant. Jennifer Morris is CEO of the Nature Conservancy, and Stefan Dacrain is the Managing Chair of the Board of Rabobank Group.
That's it.
So thank you all for being here. I'm deeply grateful. Why don't we start with you, Tomazoni? There's been a lot of political change in your country and much discussion of what it means for climate change and deforestation concerns. Can you give us your sense of the political situation there and what it means for the concerns we're here to discuss today?
It's a pleasure to be here to divide this important issue about the land and with very special person. And about the events in Brazil, I think is happened in the beginning of this year. I think is all of the entities, they took a strong reaction, and I think this is not to show that to have stability in terms of we don't want to have Brazil. If you look for the past of Brazil, we are a country that we have we don't have this kind of disturb. And democracy is priority in Brazil, and I think it is the decision that was taken for all of the institutions in Brazil was strong, and I think I see that now is a time to build a bridge, and not to fight, and because we love Brazil, we love our country, and we need to work together to better country for our population. And you talk about the climate. I attend some speech of the minister here in Davos was so positive. No, I think they are commitment for stop deforestation. They are commitment for supply chain transparency. They are committed to support farmers. I think it's a good news.
Okay, that's great to hear. And Minister Muhammad, can you tell us a sense from your point of view in terms of farmers, from their point of view, how things are going and what is the biggest concern on your mind?
We have in Colombia the challenge to define the agricultural frontier, especially as we are going through a peace process. The most critical ecosystems in Colombia are located exactly where we need to stabilize populations so that actually mafias and crime, organized crime, do not end up ruining all the critical ecosystems. How do you create an economy that, rather than destroying systematically biodiversity, on the contrary, produces systematically biodiversity? For us to stabilize that agricultural frontier and also, on the other hand, stop this organized crime that is destroying the ecosystems, we need to work with the peasants and have a very strong social pact where we are able to create an economy within that frontier that is able to use biodiversity and where the main benefits are for those communities.
So that they can feel vested in it is a positive.
That they can feel included, and that they can feel proud that they are the main actors. I am talking about the Amazon, I'm talking about the biodiverse Pacific area in Colombia, where they feel they are the main actors in restoring nature, but at the same time stopping land conversion from forest to this agricultural frontier, or this illegal mining or coca crops for cocaine frontier. And that is absolutely strategic. But the key thing is, how do you create that economy where the main benefits are for those communities? This is one of the critical things. And this will require, in many of the critical ecosystems in Colombia, an absolute commitment of the government for at least 20 years to be able to create this ecological restoration process and stopping land degradation with these communities. In Colombia, 3 main actors: peasant communities, indigenous communities, and black communities that live in these ecosystems. And finally, I don't think that we're going to stop this deforestation if we think that the forest is only a carbon sink. And if we give that to markets, what we need is a governance pact with multiple incomes and outcomes, a biodiversity economy much more complex, where there is a new type of partnership. We call it PPP, but it's not a public-private partnership. It's a public-people's partnership that creates that governance, and then with that governance we can include the private sector to contribute. If we don't get that governance, what we can be facing in the name of climate change, in the name of saving the forest, in the name of the challenge of sustaining very ecologically complex and culturally complex ecosystems like the Amazon, we could end up in another wave of extractivism. Call it carbon credit, call it genetic resources, call it different things, and I think this needs to be well thought and well governed.
You're talking about carbon credits skeptically?
I think if there is not the proper governance, and we're seeing now the proper regulation, and the proper and the question of who are the beneficiaries of these carbon credits, it could really end up in a very large financial speculation process, with the beneficiaries being intermediaries and not the communities or the forest itself.
Mm-hmm. Stefan, banks are typically seen as the intermediaries. So can you speak to the issue of carbon credits and what learning we have at this stage of what works and ultimately what works for the people that the minister is talking about?
Okay, thank you. First of all, thanks for inviting me, because it's for me an honor to be here. I'm 2 weeks CEO of Rabobank, and
congratulations!
I have to represent what Rabobank is doing in this area. So I feel very honored. I completely understand the remark concerning carbon credits. On the other hand, you have to find solutions, and each solutions that you find will be challenged, that will be triggered. With Rabobank, together with some sponsors, we created something which is called ACORN. And I tried to explain very simply. And I like the PPP of people, because people and public. It's not private and public, people and public. Because what I've learned in the last weeks is it's all agriculture, but inclusivity. How can we include the small-scale farmers in this transformation? And that's what we are trying to do with ACORN. I just explained it very simple. We have a small farmer. He's planting trees. We are creating a fund who will finance that he can plant that tree on his acre, on his land. For that, he receives a carbon credit, and that carbon credit is, we created a carbon bank to get that kind of what I'm saying, like auditing, that everything is passing correct and that the money is going to the right place. We are testing. We have today more than 300,000 already trees which are planted, but create something which is good for the land, which is good for the small-scale farmer, which is good for those people who want to invest in carbon-reducing units. And so we will see. We will see how it will evolve, but this is a small idea what we are doing. And
what are the risks with it? What could go wrong?
What can go wrong that you're saying that at the end of the road, the money is not going where it should be going, and that's the small-scale farmer. And that whole ecosystem should be very well managed. That's my advice.
Because I think the farmer needs to be incented to believe the money is going to come and it's going to be worth more than what that person would be able to decide to do with their land on their own.
Business case which is made, again, I'm 2 weeks CEO for Rabobank, I haven't checked it. The business case has been made that it's a turnaround. It's closed. So,
what do you think?
Well, I think the state should play a strong role. And especially in areas we're seeing now private companies coming to Colombia to sign deals with indigenous communities.
What kind of companies?
Like carbon
food companies
no,
or banks?
Carbon credit companies that sign deals with communities with contracts that sometimes don't even have a very strong legal basis. And then these communities end up actually giving up their land. And indigenous community land in Colombia is protected. I'm not saying this is the common case.
Right.
I'm showing that if we don't have regulation, clear rules, governance, and clarity of how to do it, and also something as Minister of Environment that is important that I have seen in Colombia is how these compensations are invested and if they are having environmental results. So we have a carbon tax. We are one of the few Latin American countries that have a carbon tax. And what happened is that many companies for not paying the carbon tax are compensating. We've been following up also public and private sector investment on compensations and restoration processes. And what we're seeing is that the results are not sustained. Only 10% of those investments have given us, we are seeing that the forest is being recovered. So that's why I said we need a governance, which includes the private sector. I am not banning on itself the potential of a carbon market, but I think it should be regulated, it should have a strong governance process, and where we as ministers of environment of government can assure our constituents, our citizens, that those investments are going to give real, serious environmental results, that we are producing biodiversity, that we are securing water, that we are securing land, that we are solving environmental issues with scientifically proven and long-term sustenance. It's a challenge for the government. Right now, at least I'm talking for Colombia, this is not the case, and probably many good intentions and a lot of money has been invested that will not yield long-term results, and we need to put the structures in place so that we assure that they do.
Okay, Thomas, I want to come back to you on this in Brazil, but Jennifer, first I want to have you weigh in on this conversation because you're obviously supposed to be a protector of the environment, and how much of this really just goes to waste.
So thanks, Jamie, for the question, and it's great to be here with all of you. I really just want to celebrate the fact that we have business, government, banking sector, which is really critical, and I hope we get to that, and the NGO community. But we are missing one group here, many groups, and that is farmers.
Right here.
Excellent. And of course, indigenous communities as well. And just to say a couple words, I think that, as the topic here is land matters, it's really critical that we make farmers the heroes. Farmers are often being criticized for destroying forests that, so 90% of tropical deforestation is from farming systems. We can't vilify farmers when we're talking about the transition. We have to help them with the right financing, the right market signals, and of course the right policy to ensure that the systems in place level the playing field for all companies, not just the ones representing here that are trying to do the right thing, but that everyone in the entire sector is actually investing in a regenerative future that makes sense for their business, but also really makes sense for the farmer and the ecosystems there. So with the specific question you asked around carbon credits, so how much time do we have? Because I could talk about this for a very long time, but just to say very, very quickly, I think I absolutely agree with you, Minister Mohammed. We have to have the controls in place. Just like any other business that you have in Colombia, you need to have regulation, you need to have systems, you need to have, really importantly, the metrics to monitor the ecological benefits, both for biodiversity of Colombia, but also, of course, for the carbon accounting of the entire world, which is why we do crediting in the first place. Number one, no one should be allowed to buy a carbon credit unless they have done everything they can in their business to get to zero. But the reality is there's still some very hard to abate aspects of certain companies, and therefore crediting, I think, is something that has been vilified, and we shouldn't do that. That needs to be done in the smart way, the highest quality integrity credits, which are transparent about what amount of money is going back to local communities. That's not happening yet in some places. We need to be transparent about where the money's going. Exactly.
Better? Where do you think better or worse is it?
Yes, exactly. And also we need to have better monitoring systems. So satellite monitoring systems, there's amazing, institutions out there that now we can monitor, is the deforestation really ending as a result of the crediting scheme? Are the communities really benefiting? How much? So those kind of things are now happening. We have new technologies that can bring that to bear. So all these things need to happen, but we're in sort of a forming of an industry. And I don't think that we should just say they're all bad because of a few bad actors. We, as the global community, those people coming here to the WEF, need to look at solutions, smart solutions, and not just throw out this as a solution, because it is providing, I've seen it in Kenya, I've seen it all over the world, where for the first time, as people's agricultural base gets eroded because of climate change, they have a new asset class. They can send their kids to school because of carbon credits. And those credits are allowing them 15-year contracts that they often don't get from the agricultural sector. These are long-term payments that are guaranteed for the life of the offtake agreement. So I think we need to just reframe our approach to this whole market, do it better, best in class, don't let companies get away with anything they shouldn't be doing themselves, but allow for this industry to boom.
Tomazoni, in Brazil, do you see a similar situation as the minister outlined, or do you see it differently?
I think the Brazil is, we have different, we have some occasions the same. I think is the main part of Brazil. We need to focus on to support the farmers with share knowledge and access to a credit to make the transition from a more sustainable farms, and they can produce more, be more efficient, and if they apply existing technology in terms of the production. And where
so it's within the grasp at this point.
The end, if we support the farmers, they will produce more. We have some examples in Brazil that if you take one degraded area and we regenerate the area, you can produce 10 times more in the same area. You can manage how you can increase the revenue from the farms, from the smallholders. But what we need to do to get there? We need to give access, a technology, a knowledge. But there is no something to be invented. I saw that Al Gore say, no, 50% of the challenge, we don't have technology, still don't have technology, or not scalable technology. But we have, in our case, we talk about from farms, we have the technology, existing technology. It's just to find a way to get this technology go to the farmers. And then how is this? Could be credit carbon, but could be blend financials. I think many things could be. Today, just 2%, less than 2% of the investment from the climate goes to the agri-foods. Less than 2%. All the investment in the climate. You can manage in the
Jennifer, help us out here. Where is most of it going?
It's 27% of about 27% annually is the emissions from agriculture, but yet less than 3% is going into it. Yeah, it's a problem.
And in the land, you can cap the emissions. This is and you can produce more.
Exactly.
Because you are not talking about food. Here we talk about climate, but the end, we need to feed a growing population. Mm-hmm. We need to produce more, and because of that, we need to think serious about this investment in the farms. I think it's really important that all the financial system look for this area, look for the farms, because we can cap carbon and we can produce more food in a more sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. Let's hear from the farmers. If you could introduce yourself to the group and I'm sorry, is the mic available? Because it's just too timely to wait.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm Arnold, the president of World Farmers Organization. One of the reason that the farmer don't invest, it's because for a question of sustainability, of security. When you don't own the land, or when you have no long-term contract, it's impossible to invest in carbon, in fertility of the soil with fertilizer, in storage, because you have never the same yield each year, and sometimes you need to storage a long time your production. And it's everywhere in the world, we need this security. Without security, the farmer can't invest in a long time, and it's more easier to touch at the mine of carbon representing by the forest to have new productive land than use the other when you have no security, all simply.
And so what's the path to that? Do you want to weigh in on that?
I think if I look from a finance point of view, land and forest is an asset. And I think today the value of that asset is not correct. It's like the price of food. The price of food are all hidden elements in the price of food that we don't see. We don't price food at the correct price. And I think if we at a certain moment in time, investors see that a quality land, a quality forest, they see it as a value, then people will invest. And I've heard, but perhaps you can correct me, but I've heard that today in Brazil, banks are financing, again, farmers who say, for 5 years, you don't do anything on your land. We will make the land healthy again, and we will find that after 5 years, you have a land, you have an acre which is much more healthy soil, which has increased the value of that land. That we should try to get in the financial community more and more embedded, the value of land and forest as an asset at the right price.
Jennifer, do you think finance is where it needs to be on this?
So
No.
I would agree, yes. I think that there's some efforts out there that give me hope. One I'll just mention is the Innovative Finance for the Amazon, Cerrado, and Chaco. And that is a group of banking institutions, suppliers, supply chain finance groups that have come together and said, we're going to invest $10 billion in the transition to regenerative agriculture. That means taking a risk. That means telling your shareholders this is important to do because we need to value natural capital. We may lose a little money, but we want to be innovative, and we know this is going to be better long-term for our business because the farmers that we're working with now will have healthier soils and healthier farms. So I think there's some efforts going in the right direction. I will say, though, that we need to really think about how do we provide the right capital that can be innovative. And I've seen this in Brazil, where the banks aren't willing to lend unless you have land title. And in Brazil, it's very difficult to get land title. So
What's your point?
Right, exactly. So the risk to take for the banks, of course, is high. Although you'll see some institutions that will lend on the base of the trade. So they'll securitize contracts. That kind of innovation, that's what we need to see more of. Because just doing the checking the box of you have your land, you don't have your land, that's going to leave a lot of farmers out in the cold, and they're not going to get the right patient capital to finance the transition.
Okay, I want to turn to the audience to questions soon, but I do want to come back to this issue that you're bringing up of, okay, save the planet, feed the world, right? And can you speak to the war in Ukraine and how that is affecting, you talk about the price of food and the calculus being made across the chain here?
Yeah, first of all, let's all hope that this terrible war ends as soon as possible. I think that's the first thing I would like to say about that. Just before joining Rabobank, I was responsible for a bank in Ukraine, which is Bank, and it's terrible to see what's happening in that country. Having said that, I think economically everybody agrees that we see the inflation of food prices, but it has become before even that we have that war in Ukraine. It has been an element in that process, but it was not the key element. That's the first thing I would like to say. The second one is, and we don't talk a lot about that here in this at Davos, but it's globalization, deglobalization. It's about trade. If we talk about food, we have to talk about trade. Because just taking the example of India, India has 40% of the population, 40. I think arable land, 15%. Healthy water, 10%. So they are obliged naturally to import. And I think what I'm seeing here today is that, and I'm very pleased to do that, and Jack's playing a very role in that, is that those trading companies, together with food companies, have already kind of planned how do we get to that more sustainable way of working, including that trade. Because trade is always seen as something negative. If we want to feed the whole world, we cannot without trade. So also that element in the whole circle, I think it's important. This morning, I think we had a session. Someone was telling, at the end, if a farmer is selling 1 tomato, what does he have? It's terrible low. It's terrible low. How can we improve that? Because we are talking at the end of the road, who is the money going to the right place? If I hear that it's 15%, even 20%, in some countries even 10% of a tomato price is going to the farmer, we have to do something about that. And that has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, which is terrible.
Okay, so we have some problems. We have a few solutions on the table. Is there any, before I turn to the audience, do you want to come back, Minister?
Yes, I think we cannot talk universally about farming. I think there is a family agriculture made by the small owner or not owner, but the peasants that actually in Colombia now we are passing a law in Congress to reform the Constitution to recognize that peasant as similar to indigenous people, because we recognize they have a culture, they have a way of life, and they have produced 80% of our food without any commercial or industrial agriculture. They are our farmers, they are part of our nation. And that's different from agribusiness, which buys and has a lot of capital investment, buys a lot of land, makes a lot of monocult crops, and creates a different dynamic. Where is the food we eat coming from? And I think around 80% of the food we are eating comes actually from the traditional farmer, from the peasant that is attached to a tradition, ownership, and culture. And I think we should see that.
What does the law do for that person? What is that law? How does that change that person's trajectory?
It will protect, it will recognize them as a special culture, similar to indigenous people and black communities in Colombia. That will entitle them probably to have peasants' reserves, because we are talking from what we call food sovereignty, which means that Colombia is able to produce and secure its food for its population and its water as a principle of being a nation. Then, if we have surplus, we can industrialize, we can export. But first, we have to protect our food and water for our population, especially on climate crisis. So when you see food in that way, water in that way, and land in that way, you are thinking in a different model of governance. It's not about a business. It's about sustaining your own population and the rights they have. Water as a right, food as a right, indigenous communities and culture also as a right. And in that situation, the land, I agree, the land ownership is very critical. We are now because of the internal conflict, we are coming very late, 21st century, to land reform. It's been done by violence in the past. Now we want to do a state land reform, and that also means in the forest how we provide ownership without taking out the natural reserves in legal terms. So we are putting now into law the concession of use to peasants of the forest, but if they are able to sustain biodiversity. So it will be something like, yes, security of the land, but against a contract with the state where you secure biodiversity. And of course, I agree very much with you. We have to provide the credit, the knowledge, the capacity for these peasants. It's not something to the market. The state has a big responsibility.
Exactly.
And we need to work it.
But not just the state. I think the companies in the banks
as well, of course.
No, just because look, you need to create a blend financials, something like that, to be creative on that and find, because we have an example. We create a fund, Brazil, for JBS fund from Amazon, just for focus on the small holders, lenders. and we are making in a partnership with Solidariedad. Then what is the idea is to create a true sustainability, because it's social integrity, social promotions, and sustainable practice together. Then you need to increase the revenue from these small farmers. And then what's the solution? To integrate there. They produce just grain or just carrots. We integrate, put a cocoa and grain and carrots. Because livestock, we at the beginning believe livestock is not important. No, livestock is really important for create cash flow for these smallholders.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you see, that is when we complain about just less than 2%, is because we are not looking for the agriculture. We are not looking for the food. Today, 1/3 of the population don't have access enough food, and we are growing population. And I agree with you. In the small producers is the solution. We need to focus on this. Focus on food. We need to have in the government minister of food.
But how does that square with the climate goals? And that's part of the challenge. But I do want to open up to questions while we have some time. Anybody? Someone want to break the ice? Are you pointing to somebody here?
About the investment, are you aware that when you have the help of the government or regional authority on investment, you push the farmer to invest also? Don't do all the investment. Imply the farmers organization. I think it's fundamental, but it's oblige the farmer to be organized, to imagine a project and not just to reproduce the way of life of the last century.
So you're saying the farmers need to have skin in the game.
Yes, imply the farmer in the game, the farmer organization, and push the farmer organization to be an actors and not just partners, but come into the game.
Yes, if you could please say who you are and give us your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Duke. I'm a social entrepreneur from Thailand. My question is actually the relationship between government, corporate sector, and the farmers. It seems that the legwork is mostly done through the farmers, but the technology and the investment is actually in the hands of the big corporations. Now, the question is, how can we actually marry the two with some sincerity, meaning that not only the skin in the game, but something that is long term, because I think this is critical in terms of trying to provide, optimize the usage of land. So I'd like to hear some of the viewpoints from you guys.
Do you want to take that, because you talked about the program that you're working with small farmers, and how do you really be effective on a day-to-day basis in supporting them?
I can start with an answer, but probably some other people can add on. What I've seen here in my different talks the last 2 days is I think this forum has come from business to digital to energy, and now it's all about health, and it's all about food, and it's all about sustainable in the broad sense. So everybody is talking about sustainability. I've seen CEOs of big companies that thought they would talk to me about banking. They didn't talk to me about banking. They all talked to me, what are you doing on sustainability? What can we do together on sustainability? So at the end of the road, if you talk, is the money over there? Are the funds there? Is the availability there? I think so. There's a lot. My big question is, how do we get it to the right level? And if we get it to the right level, then they can have the possibility to invest also in more technical innovation. And that whole process, Rabobank, we cannot organize it. We can just give our knowledge, our expertise to local banks. And that's what we are going to try to do. Again, I'm there too. Work with local banks, which are a kind of servicing that we do to local banks. We have 180 research people who are looking at food and agri. I think we are unique in the world on that, 180 people. I'm just learning. I say, what are we doing with that? What are we doing with all those research? That's my first question, should create add value. Well, that kind of research we can bring out to other banks, to other players, because it should be the local financial players who should be active in the local countries. I cannot do anything. I can bring my my expertise, I can bring, or partnerships with all the different players we have in that ecosystem, that I can do. But locally, everything should be set up locally. The lowest, the better. And I see, you can better judge than me, that local banks are more and more open to work in that kind of ecosystem. That's a little bit my comment.
Yeah, if I could add something. So I'm sitting here listening to this and just thinking of all the times that I've spent in farming communities, and there's just a critical lack of extension services still. And we've been talking about this for so long.
Describe what you mean by extension services.
Meaning training for farmers, suggestions on how to change production practices so that they could be more intensive and then have more yield per acre. I mean, all of these sort of technologies that exist out there in the world, farming technologies that we know of, farming practices. And of course, indigenous people have been doing it right for a very, very long time.
I was going to say,
now,
maybe people feel like they know well what they're doing, or?
Yeah, well, yes, but I would say that now we're in a place where the planet is changing so much. We have to throw out all the rules in many respects. It's a whole new day in terms of how we're treating land. And so there are examples. You can't expect a farmer in Colombia to know the best practices of farming in Thailand, but there's amazing things happening. So how do we connect that, and how do we get that down to the farmers, whether it's the right kind of finance, the right kind of knowledge, and again, to get from where we are now to where we need to be in terms of regenerative agriculture, where 80% of the farming of the planet is done by people who have less than 2 hectares of land. That's going to require a massive investment and change in the way we think about providing that information. It can't come from on high, from digital platforms. It's really got to be hyper-local. And so thinking about, is it the role of only the ag companies to do that? Because you're filling the gap, right? Because it's not coming from the government. It's not coming from a lot of institutions. It's the companies themselves that are providing that, which is great, but sometimes that's not possible, and it's not profitable in some cases. So,
I guess there is something about public banks and the state also as an investor, and the state also as a promoter of the economy. Since we got in the last 30 years to a paradigm where the market takes full control of everything, I'm exaggerating, but the state has a responsibility to work on the land, to provide the extension services, to put the research centers, and to bring, of course, the private sector as well. But we cannot, as state, just watch and think that the transition to a more ecological farming or the transition to a forestry and more biodiversity economy will happen on its own. So for us, actually, we are creating the extension service for reforestation, land restoration, and biodiversity, because it's something that the state has to work every day with that farmer in that change. And also, we are setting our public banks as a priority to invest in this biodiversity economy and this green economy. So public banks can play a role, and it's not also about the revenue of the bank, but it's about the end result that is part of the general policy.
Well, I think banks do tend to focus on revenue, right?
But public banks have a larger commitment to make economic policy happen. They are not. They don't need the profit. They need profit, of course, but profit is not the measurement of their success. The measurement of the success is that the policy of the government is implemented as well. Of course, the revenue margins could be less, but and because of that, they should be able to take further risks than maybe private or multilateral banking. And I think is underestimated, or in many countries have been dismantled. I think, at least in Colombia, we are strengthening the power of the public sector to be also a promoter of the economy, not only a regulator.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's something that we will see, probably not in the short term. I would love to, but it won't be the case. But I think in the midterm, I talk about 5-7 years, is what's the value of sustainability for a company and a bank? Because today we are all valued as a company on our financials. Whatever I do on sustainability and making very good results on that, it's not valued in the value of my company.
I think it is more than it used to be.
And that's what you're talking about, public banks, they have a little bit, we are a cooperative bank. My members, they really ask, it's in my mission, to grow a better world together. That's my mission.
So you're kind of between the public and a private bank.
Yeah,
in a way.
financials are important, but they are not important number one. We have other goals than just making money. And today, like I was talking in food prices, you have hidden costs. The other thing that we'll see, I think, in the future is how do we value, and is the investment community ready to value the sustainability of a company, or is it only the financial results? And that depends on all of us. Are you going to invest in a company which will probably a little bit less results financially, but better on sustainability? That's the question for the future.
It's all about
the next
ESG,
question.
right?
Yeah.
And I think also coming down to the farmer, I think it seems fair that they're going to need to be motivated that it's going to be economically viable for them, and
sure.
that's what it comes down to.
It cannot be a panel. It has to be a good balance.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to make a segment when you talk about, we are talking about farmer, but you need to segment because we have too much different farmers in this, and each layers, they need different service or different support, and I think it's really important. And take your question about how you can do that, how you can put all the players together and make a roadmap, a shared roadmap about how to do that. This is really the challenging question, because if you go to the smallholders, we see lack of leadership there. If you want to do something in the community, it is difficult to find a leader that can take the responsibility, take and join, because some part of the problem in the small community is the trade, because they sell for one trade company or a trade guy, and they sell for the other. If you take all of the value, they really stay at the low level of the value, because the people in intermediate take a lot of the advantage. And then
So many intermediaries.
we need to
taking the piece,
this is the question that, of course, we try to make. I think it's all of us try to find a solution, but maybe this is a good topic, and it's very important topic. If we're not able to engage all the value chain, it will be big challenge.
Okay, I'm going to talk it past to WEF to wrap it up here. Jack Hurd.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming this afternoon. Thank you very much, Jamie, for the moderation. Thank you for all of our panelists. I just want to say two things. One is that we're here because we have started a conversation within the World Economic Forum about nature and climate. One of the things that's really big about climate is most people around the world think about climate, they think about mobility, they think about energy, they think about the built environment. They don't think about the fact that land is 23% or 25% or 27% of the CO2 emissions. It's also 33% of the solution between now and 2030. So this notion of focusing on the land from a climate perspective, super important. Equally important, focusing on nature for nature's sake, because I don't know who was in the plenary session earlier, but we're actually exceeding, if not already exceeded, our planetary boundaries for a lot of things. So this dynamic of climate and nature, super important, even more important in the developing economies where agriculture, where fisheries, where farming has a much greater impact on GDP, on employment, on revenue in rural areas, on infrastructure in rural areas, and the like. And I think what we've been learning here at the World Economic Forum, and I think we're learning here on the stage today, is that we need a different sort of production model. There's been a production model that's existed since the beginning of agriculture. We now need to change that. It needs to be focused on how do we become more climate conscious and nature positive in how we produce food for local markets, for global markets, and for the rest of the humanity. And that's going to require efforts on the part of government. It's going to require efforts on the part of big business. It's going to require efforts on the part of finance. It's going to require efforts on the part of civil society, indigenous people, farmers associations in general. So this is the beginning of a conversation that this group will have. The World Economic Forum is taking this body of work further. We've got a big program on food systems. We've got a big program on nature. And so watch this space. We'll be back with more stuff in the future. So thanks very much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Great, thank you.